Welcome to Kotlin. This video is part of a series where we're building Minesweeper with Compose Multiplatform. Whilst it's designed to be useful on its own, there may be some references to earlier episodes. Multi-module architecture is a great way to keep your code organised, scalable and maintainable. Let's look into some of the benefits of modularity. Each module should serve a specific purpose. By defining these clear boundaries through modules, the project remains easier to test and debug, as we'll see in future episodes. Breaking your project into modules allows you to scale an app easily. Each module focuses on a specific responsibility, and this benefit can be seen the most when working in teams. It's nice to be able to work on an isolated feature knowing that you're not conflicting with someone else's current work. Modules allow you to control what part of the module's API is visible to other modules that depend on it. This can help to ensure that intended internal functions remain internal. Gradle can optimize build times a lot more efficiently when the project is split into modules. A simple example is not needing to rebuild a module if it hasn't been touched since the last build. In clean architecture, modules are typically organized into layers. The app layer is where the application comes together and launches. It depends on any needed feature modules, but typically doesn't contain any business logic or UI components itself. Instead, it acts as a coordinator. Feature modules handle specific features or screens in your app. For example, in MinesweeperK we'll have feature modules for the menu, settings, high scores and gameplay. Each feature is self-contained, making it easier to add or remove functionality without affecting the rest of the app. Essentially, feature modules orchestrate the UI and domain logic for a particular feature of the app. They'll depend on the UI module for visual components and will depend on any domain modules that's applicable for that specific feature. The UI layer defines shared UI components, themes and utilities that can be reused across all features. This ensures a consistent look and feel across the app. The domain layer is where the magic happens. This is where all business rules and logic are defined. Any domain layer should be decoupled from any platform specific or UI related code so that it can be used by any feature that needs it. For example, the domain modules will not have any dependencies on any Android code. It will purely be written in Kotlin. Within the domain layers, there will be use cases, which will be explained in more detail as the series progresses. In a nutshell, a use case is a class that contains the business logic to perform a single operation. The domain modules typically only depend on the data layer. And finally, the data layer handles everything behind the scenes to do with managing data. This includes fetching, storing, creating, anything to do with managing data is done here. The entry points into the data layer is usually done through repositories. In strict clean architecture, only the domain modules depend on the data layer, but in practice, feature modules often depend on it too for simple things like calls to repositories or anything that's simply forwarding a function from the data layer. The data modules can rely on platform-specific APIs. So for example, in this series they will depend on Room for database usage and Data Store for user preferences. With these layers in mind, let's map them to the actual modules we'll create in MinesweeperK. In the real world, modules aren't really planned out to this extent at the start of a project. Applications should be created in a way that features can be abstracted out into modules as needed, so when the scale and complexity of the project grows. UI Core is a shared UI module for reusable components, themes and styles. Data Core is for shared data utilities such as common repository interfaces. Data Settings, this will handle the storage and retrieval of user preferences. Data Game will manage game related data, so like the Minesweeper board and the scores. Domain Settings will contain the use cases related to the settings and user preferences. Domain Game will contain the core business logic for the gameplay. Feature menu will manage the menu screen, acting as a navigator to all of the features. Feature settings will handle the settings screen. Feature high scores will be used to display the high scores. And finally, feature play will contain the gameplay screen, including the UI for the Minesweeper board. Now that we've designed our architecture, the next step is to create these modules in Android Studio. I'll walk you through creating the modules and configuring their dependencies. We'll start by adding a new module. We'll start with the UI core module because it's probably the most basic. So to start, we can just right click the root folder and make sure you're in project view as well and go new module. Now the plugin for Android Studio should give an option at the bottom here for a Kotlin Multiplatform module. It often doesn't work with the latest versions of Android Studio, so for that reason we're just going to create it from scratch, and to be honest, it's a good learning tool to see what each section of the build.gradle file does. So we can simply close that and just create a new directory instead. So for this we're going to say UI/core. So the first thing we need to do is add it to the settings.gradle. So simply include, you can say UI:core. And from there we can press sync, and now that should be added, and you'll see in a second these will be picked up as a module. So the first thing we need is the build.gradle file. Now it's probably easiest here to just take it directly from the Compose app build.gradle. So there's a few plugins that we need to apply. So if we just copy this whole section and paste it in, there is one change we need to make. This is a library module, it's not an application, so we'll simply change this to Android library. So if we sync, these should get picked up, and these are just coming directly from the TOML file that we created in the last episode. So if we click in, we can see it's just coming from this section here, the plugins. So now that this is synced, we should have access to the Kotlin block, which comes from the Kotlin Multiplatform plugin, and we need to add our targets. So we will just take that directly from this build.gradle file again, from the Compose app. So you can see Android, iOS, and the JVM targets. So we just copy those, paste them in. You might have noticed it's automatically imported. In your IDE it might not, so these are the import statements you'll need. And the only change we need to make is for the iOS target for the framework. We can just change the name to UI core. The only other thing we'll need in this block are the where we add the dependencies for this module. So this is simply in source sets, and within here we can add it for whatever platform we need. So for example, common main.dependencies. This is where we can add any dependencies, any shared dependencies. The only remaining thing we need is the Android block, which again we can just take from the Compose app build.gradle. So if we just copy this whole section, as you can see we can't use application ID. That's because we changed this to Android library, which is correct. So we can get rid of application ID and the version code and name, and we'll also get rid of the deprecated target SDK. And oh no, there is one more thing. We'll change the namespace to match the module that we're in. So .ui.core. And that should be everything we need for the module. So we'll sync that. And if we go back to the Compose app build.gradle, once this is finished syncing, we'll be able to add this as a dependency within common main. So We say implementation project.ui.core. So that's our new module there. So we can sync, and now that's good to go. Now, one more thing to add is the code that we actually write for this module will live inside UI core, and in here if we add a new directory we'll want source, and for the common code we'll want /common main /Kotlin, and within here we'll make the package match the module. So in this case it's going to be com.kotlin.minesweeperk.ui.core. So all of the common code can go in here, and say if we wanted some Android specific code, we just add the directory for Android main /Kotlin and put it inside of there. Here I'm just simply creating all the modules as highlighted in the module graph that we showed earlier. I'm just simply doing that in exactly the same way, apart from I'm just copying this new build.gradle file that we've created and changing the iOS framework name and the Android package. So now that all of the modules have been added, we can set up the dependencies between the modules. So we'll just work our way down the list, looking at the graph that we showed earlier in the episodes. So inside the Compose app, this will depend on all of the features. So that's menu, play, settings, and high scores. It'll also depend on the UI.core, which it already is. So we'll add the features. So we've got menu, settings, high scores, and play. So next we'll go into data. Data core doesn't have any dependencies. Data game has a dependency on data.core. We'll copy this because the settings data module has exactly the same. Just a dependency on data.core. Next we'll go into domain, and domain game has a dependency on both data.game and data.settings. We'll add both of those. And next, the settings domain module, that just has a dependency on data.settings. Now onto the features. So the high scores feature module just has a dependency on the game domain module. Domain.game. The menu, we also need the UI.core for each of these features. We'll copy that. In menu, that is the only dependency for the menu feature module. And next into play, so we have UI.core. We also have domain.game. And the last module, settings, has UI.core, and it also has domain.settings, and that should be it. So synchronize that, make sure everything's okay, but that's all the dependencies added. One small change we'll make is within the domain modules. They shouldn't be referencing anything to do with the Android code. It should be purely written with Kotlin. So we can get rid of the Android library. We can also get rid of the Android target because it's covered by JVM. So get rid of that. These imports can go, and we'll need to get rid of this whole Android block. And we'll do the same for the other domain module. So settings, get rid of the imports, the Android target, the plugin, and the Android block. Our next step, we'll just check that everything's working correctly. We'll just add a small screen to the menu feature, and we'll access that from the app. So first of all, we need to add the common main source folder. We'll add the package to go with it. So in our case, that's com.kotlin.minesweeperK, and the package for this will be feature.menu. So within here, we'll create just a small composable named menu screen. This is just purely for testing. Yes, of course, we need to add the Jetpack Compose dependencies to the build.gradle file for this. So we'll just take those directly from the Compose app build.gradle. So that's all of these for common main. We'll also need the Android dependencies, and we'll need the desktop dependencies, including Swing. So we'll copy these. We've got the Android dependencies. We'll take the Compose dependencies and also the desktop dependencies. And we need to get desktop main. We do that with the getting delegate. So if we sync this, once it's synced, yep, we can now access the Compose code. So we'll get back to adding the menu screen. In here we'll just add a few functions to go to all of the features. So we'll have go to play, we've also got high scores, and we've got settings. And here we'll simply just have a column. We can make it look a bit nicer by adding some alignment. We'll add a vertical arrangement as well, just to keep everything centered. And in here we'll just add 3 text buttons. The first, we'll go to play. Again, since this is just for testing, we'll just hard code this text in here. Just make a couple of copies of the text button, go to high scores, go to settings. I'm not sure if high scores is 1 or 2 words, but it's going in as 1. So now that menu screen's created, and go into Compose app, find the entry point of the app, which is in here, app.kt. And this is just the default UI that comes when you download the project from the Kotlin Multiplatform wizard. So we can get rid of that and we'll just replace it with our menu screen. So we'll fill the remaining arguments. Here we'll just do fill max size, and for now these code blocks we'll just replace with empty code blocks. They're not going anywhere at the moment, but as you can see, the general idea of this Compose app module allows the navigation between the features, which will be done inside these code blocks. So if we run this now, we should see the menu screen. Be nothing exciting, but as you can see, it's using that feature module. One small improvement we can make is if we go back to the build.gradle file of the menu module, where we're including all of these Compose dependencies, these should all really be coming from one place. So we can move this inside the UI.core module. So we'll just copy this whole thing for ease. So now if we go to UI core and build.gradle, . So this has been copied into here. So this is what it should look like within UI.core. We can get rid of it from the menu module, get rid of the Android. Well, we'll keep the blocks there, but we'll get rid of the actual dependencies. Sync. And now what we need to do to be able to access these within modules that depend on UI.core, we can change all of these implementations to be API, and that way anything dependent on UI.core can now use this whenever you use API. So this should now work across all features. We can also change it inside the Compose app build.gradle. If we go into there, we now don't need any of this anymore because it's transitive, it's coming through this UI.core and it's allowing access. So we'll simply delete those. We'll sync and we'll just do one last check to make sure it's still running correctly. Taking a while to sync. There we go. So we'll run. Yep, and as you can see, it's accessing the Compose code completely fine. As we wrap up, I want to emphasize that you don't need to have every module planned out from the very beginning. Modularization is a tool for growth and not a strict requirement. The most important thing is to write your code in a structured and organized way, keeping responsibilities clear and separated. As your project evolves, you can always extract modules when it makes sense. The key is to ensure your code is clean and maintainable, so scaling the app or introducing new features becomes a natural and seamless process. In the next episode, we'll take this foundation and start defining dependency injection structure with Coin, so we'll tie these modules together. Thanks for watching and make sure to subscribe for the next one.